Thank you for coming. Our speakers today are myself, Alex Murphy. I'm the co-founder of Balance, previously marketing director in Admiral and performance manager in lead in Go Compare. And with me today, providing all of our fantastic data, is Natasha. Natasha, you want to introduce yourself?
Of course. Great to meet you all, everyone. My name is Natasha. I lead Similarweb's advisory or consulting services for financial services clients in EMEA. So essentially helping our data land better, make bigger impact, and sort of answer your deep strategic questions, particularly in the light of everything that's going on the AI side. Prior to this, I worked at Kantar for 7 years. So I've always been in the consumer insights and sort of research space. So again, great to meet you and great to be with you here today.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right, very quickly, the agenda. So we'll be setting the scene. Natasha will be setting the scene for us with this absolutely bang on fresh data, which is fantastic, showing the impact of what these changes are having. Then I'll take over and we'll talk about what this means in terms of discovery, how it's changed SEO and what it hasn't changed. And then we'll talk about some tips towards the end. But then we'll have questions afterwards. So sharp and fast, and off we go.
Perfect. And I think it's worth saying if you'd like to drop your questions into the chat while we're presenting, that would be great. And we're happy to sort of answer them towards the end. So to set the scene, discovery has always traditionally begun via Google search. But with the advent of GenAI, we have started to already see impacts on traditional Google search. And what you see here is an example of the monthly search volume for mortgage-related keywords. And we've sort of tracked this over time, over the sort of past 12 months and the year before that as well. And you can quite clearly see the blue line for sort of the 2025-26 year is significantly lower than the year prior to that. Putting aside seasonal shifts, putting aside everything, the pure volume of searches for these keywords has been significantly lower. And this is a big shift because we know that GenAI is solving for a real need. So previously, where you would have put in multiple individual searches, received sort of several different links in response to your query, have to visit many different websites to kind of perform your discovery, choose an insurance provider, choose a new credit card. Today, with the advent of GenAI and ChatGPT and the rest of the engines, you're obviously performing much more of a full context conversational search. Your sort of initial output that you're receiving from the engine is much more nuanced. It is a full, rich answer tailored to your needs. And of course, you can then refine and personalize immediately within that chat rather than having to sort of visit different places and optimize that way. And again, ultimately getting to a much stronger and more personalized output. And that's where, in light of this sort of stagnation or even slight decline of Google search in this era, what you're seeing in comparison is the rapid and exponential growth, really, of GenAI in the same time. So volumes today are significantly much lower, of course, for GenAI conversations compared to Google. Google is still very much the king. However, when you index for sort of the starting point, and if we choose April 2025 as a starting point, what you see here is relative to their original volumes, Google is generally stagnating or declining, but GenAI conversations across ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, Copilot, and we can measure all of these different LLMs, is significantly on the uptake. So that's definitely worth confirming our hypothesis that this is something not just being used for queries in the broader world, in the productivity side of things, in research, but also for this industry within financial services where high consideration products are being researched by consumers and shoppers. So we know that this change is taking place. We know that adoption is taking place for these platforms. Well, what does this actually look like in terms of the impact on the industry? When we look at the list of top finance sites in the UK and measure the biggest sources of referrals coming to those finance sites, we've seen a dramatic shift in the landscape. ChatGPT is now the second largest source of traffic for this entire industry and the subset of sites, which is a huge change compared to where we were from the past 12 months. So it is moving the needle. It is a significant channel to consider and to monitor over time because it's definitely moving the needle, and it has leapfrogged what used to be the key lion's share source of traffic previously. Your price comparison websites, your sort of advice websites, which things like that. ChatGPT is very much within this set and is now beating a lot of the players within this set. So we know adoption is on the rise. We know queries and questions around things like mortgages, insurance are on the rise. And we know that traffic referred to your domains and top financial services websites is also on the rise. So who's winning in this scenario? This is the key question that we're getting from our clients all the time. Where do I show up? Who's actually winning the lion's share of traffic from these sort of conversations? This is where not everybody is going to get the same share of traffic. So when we account for the relative size of each of these banks being different in terms of their web traffic, so per 10,000 visits that they receive, and we subsegmented that by the amount of visits received from AI referrals, in the green bars, you see something very interesting. This is where GenAI is quite clearly favoring or sort of sending a disproportionate amount of referrals to these digitally native, app-first, reviews-led banks that are definitely optimizing to make sure that they're staying visible and are sort of showing up on top. And this chart is really quite stark, I think, in the way that you see this referrals play out. And it shows us that while this adoption may be small today and is definitely growing of LLMs for consumers when they're performing the research, as adoption grows and volumes grow, this divide is likely only going to be exacerbated. It's only going to be doubled down on because already today we see this emerge as an early dynamic. So that's a bit of a snapshot of kind of where we are. Thinking about kind of what we see in broader categories as well, it's worth sharing this level of inspiration. We know that the traffic that's coming in from GenAI is also better quality traffic. So this is an example from e-commerce as a category rather than financial services, but it still sort of proves the point that aside from paid search, ChatGPT is actually outperforming a lot of the other channels, definitely all of the organic channels, in terms of how it's converting and sending people through straight to the bottom of the funnel. So these are, again, high intent users. As if you think of it as an audience, this is really a rich audience to tap into, people who are going here to do their research. And obviously the way that the algorithm is putting out its responses, the way you're being cited, the way people are then being sent on through to transactional sites is clearly enabling a higher rate of conversion and a higher rate of success. We also asked consumers who belong to our market research panel, so we're able to sort of survey them, how they felt about the use of AI tools. And again, this is a little bit more tailored towards retail, but I think the point still stands. The usage of AI and the reason why people are going to AI in their minds is distinctly different. There's a lot of discovery that's taking place. Again, Google is still relevant, which is what we saw in that early slide. Those volumes will still remain. We're not suggesting that it's going away. It'll always be used as a navigational source. However, a lot of that discovery and getting initial ideas, comparing options, really getting into that consideration stage of the funnel and, feeling that you're confident in the value you're getting or finding the best price. That's where AI tools are over-indexing in the way sentiment is being built around them. This is how people feel about how they should be using GenAI tools and where they see the value from GenAI tools. Continuing on, so we know that along with the navigational data that we have, we can also see a lot of detail within ChatGPT prompts and the way that Similarweb is measuring them. And again, going back to the point I had made earlier, these prompts and these searches are high context rich searches. So the amount of information somebody's putting in there on average in a Google search is about 3 words, but when it comes to ChatGPT is nearly 70 keywords in the length of their searches. So just to illustrate the amount of rich information that we have on consumers and shoppers when they're operating within this channel, and it explains why it's converting better, right? You're getting much more tailored responses to what you're putting in there as a prompt. We can then analyze these prompts and categorize these conversations to actually size the volume that it's having an impact on each category and within each industry. So that's what we've done here. We've looked at, for March in the UK, within financial services and the entire set of financial services related prompts, how does that break down across the different categories and industries? So unsurprisingly, this mirrors the broad makeup of the industry in itself. The majority of consumer-led queries, a third, are around savings and investments and for people to optimize their own financial health. Following that, you've got queries around trading, around currency, around kind of more operational elements. Mortgages and lending and borrowing and credit comes right through after that. People, asking real personal queries about how to borrow and kind of prepare for that next step. And then, of course, you've got accounting, you've got insurance, and you've got sort of daily banking queries as well. So this is something that evolves, and I should say this is 1 month of data, but this evolves over time in light of seasonal changes. As the housing market picks up a bit more over spring, summer, you'll likely see more queries around borrowing and mortgages, as there's new developments emerging in terms of savings rates, in terms of, Bank of England's rates, we will start to see these topics shift over time. And it's definitely something to monitor because it gives you that real picture, just like traditional search and keyword tracking, of what people are actually asking and how those needs are being addressed by Gen AI. We can then double click into any of these industries. And as an example, we've done it for insurance here. You can see, well, what types of insurance are people actually asking about? Car insurance was the biggest within the month of March, followed by sort of your other subcategories, pretty evenly distributed across business, travel, life, and the rest of the insurances. It's worth saying that claim management is such a prominent need in the way people are asking these prompts that it actually makes up its own subset and up to 22% of conversations. So that spans across the different categories, but it's such a standalone, strong need in the way that people are trying to troubleshoot, people are trying to ask questions about their policies, actually make sure that their claims are addressed. And it's a real question, instead of coming to your own insurance site by policyholders, are they going to Gen AI instead to get this information and to get this advice from this other source? What information are they receiving there, and is it aligned with your message and with your policy, with your compliance? Is it aligned with what you want it to be? So we've talked about conversations, adoption, and kind of how that breaks into the different industries. Now, the key thing that everybody wants to, of course, know is, well, where do I show up in terms of visibility? So here's an example. We've pulled the health insurance category for March and looked at how the different big players spread out across different LLM tools and how they are cited by LLMs in their generated responses. So this is not about what users are putting in as queries. That's sort of a reflection of general brand awareness, your market share. What you really want to know is, what is an LLM saying about me? And if someone's in a research state of mind, best health insurance options, no prior history health insurance options, are you showing up in response to those while people are in that consideration stage? And what we see here is generally a good reflection of how the market plays out anyway. So Bupa is the highest, followed by Aviva, Vitality, and the rest of the players. This story gets a little bit more interesting, though, when you break it down by the different LLMs. So not all LLMs are treating all brands equally. So when you look at the overall breakdown of LLM responses by each platform, ChatGPT, AI Mode, Gemini, Perplexity, and you can replicate this for any and all, Claude and the rest of them, you can see a very different story. So ChatGPT and Perplexity overall are citing brands at a much lower proportion compared to AI Mode or Gemini. So they might be providing a lot more unbranded responses. They might be providing comparisons in a more generic way. And generally, you're seeing a lower proportion of visibility on these platforms. But AI Mode and Gemini, it might have to do with how people are, of course, asking these questions, particularly in AI Mode. But also when it comes to the algorithm that Google's using, there's clearly a difference. There's a much higher visibility that we're seeing within these platforms. And then when you look at the dynamic of the different brands, if I had to just call out one of these, you can see Vitality, for example, is scoring pretty low on the ChatGPT side of things. It's the second lowest of the comparative set. But when you look at AI Mode, and particularly when you look at Gemini, they over-index significantly on these platforms. So there is definitely something to be said, and the algorithms are changing all the time. So this is definitely something that evolves. But there's definitely something to be said that not one size fits all for each LLM. They have different algorithms. They have different reasons why they're prioritizing different types of content. And that's definitely something to break out rather than thinking of Gen AI as one monolith, essentially. The last thing from my side that I'll leave you on is, where are these citations coming from? So is it enough to just optimize on your own sites? And the answer here is not really, because earned really dominates your owned content. So in finance conversations, of everything that we just talked about, third-party domains are making up 8 out of 10 of the top cited sources. So that's what you can see highlighted there in yellow on the right. And when it comes to your owned content, it's really making up a small share of what LLMs are sourcing and citing. They really pay a lot of attention to peer-reviewed information, to reviews, to Reddit and other social platforms where earned media is really driving advice. So that's definitely something to think about. It's not all about your owned content for sure. But Alex is going to go a lot more into that. So that's my bit in terms of the data, and happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you, Natasha. Okay, right. I'll get straight into my bit. So how does that change how we approach organic online visibility? Lots of ways and no ways at all is the answer. So let's step back for a second, because AI is a bit much, right? And so let's work out, what are we optimizing for when we talk about AEO, GEO, all of those. Really, ultimately, we just want to be talked about by the AI. We want our brand to be recommended, okay? And there's two kind of main forms of that. There's brand mentions and recommendations. So you type something in, it says, oh, so-and-so says, blah, blah, blah. But brand citations, which usually involve links to your sites. So I can see Nathan in the chat there. This is almost like your mental availability and your physical availability. Yeah? You want people to talk about it, you want the AIs to talk about it, but you also want to link through and to be able to access us. And those are the links. Get something like 120% more clicks than those brands that don't have citations. So we want those within LLM prompt responses across the different engines, obviously. But there's only 3 kind of ways to appear in those. You are in the original training data. Training data, you are being pulled live via RAG, and then co-occurrence and semantic mapping, which really comes down to, if you're an SEO, your topical authority, but from a brand perspective, the brands that you are, the things you're associated with. You know, what does it see? What does the AI see you as an individual entity? And that's critical. So this chart we've used lots of times, right? This is your sort of SEO in a nutshell. Okay, and I'm not going to go through every one of these. A lot of you will be familiar with these different tactics, but this chart has not changed a great deal, even when we think about AIO. Now, I'm not saying it's the same. It's not the same. As we've just heard, there are differences. Otherwise, all of the AI results would just be exactly the same as the Google results. Obviously, there's differences here, but there are lots of aspects of this, when you break it down, that are still very, very critical. And of course, we still need to appease the Google beast, right? Because it's still about 200 times bigger. But there are critical things which I'll go into now. So classic SEO process we'll be familiar with, which is you do your keyword research, then you have your, which is looking at which couple of words, 2 or 3 words, as we saw, people are typing in, what are the head terms, how does that seasonality change? Then we talk about the on-site SEO, your technical setup, your content is optimized for those searches. Then we have our off-site SEO, which is your backlink acquisition, your digital PR, how much you're getting visibility on elsewhere. And then, of course, the old school measurement. You know, how was our keyword doing? Are we position 1 for whatever that's worth these days? What is our click-through rate? And what is our analytics data telling us? Of course, what does change with AEO and GEO is the 2 end bits. So keyword research, we just saw this, right? 68.2 words, which I still struggle with. We checked like 3 times, like, you sure? And if you think about how you use, if you use AI when you're trying to do your searches, and it makes sense, right? You have a couple of queries, and before you know it, you've written hundreds of words in and have a full conversation. It's like having the longest of long tail keywords, which makes it almost impossible to measure in terms of keywords. You're very much talking about topics, but that changes the game slightly. Topic ownership as opposed to keyword ownership. On-site SEO is very much the same. You know, your site needs to be structured well. It needs to be able, you know, it needs to be visible to the AIs. They need to be able to get to you. URL visibility is critical. Little things like that are all a key part of it. Off-site SEO, we'll talk a bit more about this as well. This is becoming huge. As Natasha just said, earned dominates. And if you're anything like me, and for my sins, I think it was always the third wheel of SEO. I did digital PR kind of last. It was like and sometimes looked upon a bit dirtily when people were doing bad backlink acquisition. But proper digital PR is going to become so critical at this stage. And finally, measurement. Now, we're talking with the measurement tool here. We're in partnership here. Obviously, measurement is possible, but it is not as clean as it used to be. And there's still a huge amount of debate about how best to measure these things. And so we need to be on top of this. It's not as simple as being able to see the inputs and outputs as we have before. So we've got to keep on top of it. So there are lots of factors that have been analyzed that are affecting LLM visibility, and these possibly will change over time. But there have been so many studies that we took a look at a study that almost encapsulated them all. And there's a lot of these out there where they look at correlation, and you've got to be important. You've got to note this correlation between types of tactics and factors that have a high confidence score of improving your visibility. Now, I've put the ones in yellow here, which are probably most relevant. But if you look at the top right corner, we've got brand mentions in digital PR. So that's some of your semantic relationships. We've got structured content, which is some of your RAG stuff. And then we've got comprehensive content, which is, again, you're really known about as an expert in this field. And you don't have to believe us. This is only from a couple of weeks ago. This is Danny Sullivan, who's director of Google Search. He was saying the same thing. Good SEO is good GEO. It's not the whole bag, but it's a big part of it. You've got strong SEO. You're in a better position than a lot of people. A lot of people aren't doing good SEO. You're in a better position than most. What also has been updated just at the end of April was this little snippet here from AI Overviews, in that you'll see that AI Overviews will be citing experts, and I use the air quotes for a good reason, experts in terms of its content. And we'll talk about why, therefore, using AI content or AI generated content might not be the smartest move. But let's move on to that. So the Ouroboros effect. AI is designed not to consume its own generated stuff, right? Otherwise, you'd very quickly devolve into rubbish. Equally, Google doesn't want to generate a load of search results based off something a machine has cobbled together from other spaces. It makes sense, right? Why would it give you something that already exists as new content? So AI doesn't want, ironically, AI content. Google doesn't want it either. I mean, look at EAT. We launched Balance 3 years ago with a big study on financial services, EAT, and consumer duty. And we found that a lot of businesses weren't doing well with this. And actually, as we saw earlier, the ones that were doing really strong in EAT were actually the ones that we just saw coming up at the top of the AI recommendations. So there's something there, right? Now, but you also see LLMs using YouTube more, possibly because it's harder to generate, but also because it's such a wealth of data for it. What SEO and GEO do thrive on, just like SEO, just like digital PR and humans, is fresh data, expert insights, proprietary info, stuff that you've got that no one else has got, expert writers. And we would say that as managing a team of expert writers, but of course, better written content for humans and for machines works. Literal question style headings. How does X work? How does that work? Now, there's a couple of points here. Breaking long explanations into bullet point summaries. Now, when I first proposed it, put this on a slide, it was everyone was saying, you have to chunk up your content. You have to do this. What we found is that's not actually a very effective tactic. And actually, the AI chunks it up. You've got to be on top of things. Add an FAQ sections to the end of service and product pages. Absolutely. But apply schema types to FAQ and schema types like FAQ page and how to improve extractability. It's a good practice, but it doesn't improve extractability. So you've got to keep on top of these things and keep moving with the research, which we'll always be citing and referring to. So using LLM generated copy, therefore, is currently a high risk tactic. But there's loads of evidence of this. It's not just us saying that. There's something called the false dawn, or as I saw the other day, the rank and tank, all right? Which is when people use huge amounts of AI-generated content or even large amounts, they actually see a big uplift originally, or often they do. And it sounds like, well, hold on, this is great. But if it's easy to make, it's easy to break, okay? And what we see time and time again is this false dawn, rank and tank, Mount AI, huge spike, and then a crash as the AI engine, but also Google goes, whoa, hold on now, this isn't legit, and then moves on. So be very careful. And also, if your leadership team is saying to you, well, why can't we just use AI to do that? Well, that's a very good reason. Now, referring back to Natasha's chart earlier, digital PR, and about earning dominated. so we saw those different health insurers and how they relatively performed, and we saw some of the main ones. Now, again, correlation, but if we look at using digital PR and their backlink profiles as a sort of proxy for brand visibility out there, we'll see again that the ones with the highest visibility tend to be the ones with the highest links, the highest DR links, the highest referring domains, the biggest domain rating, so there's a big correlation there between huge brand presence, huge mental availability, and also the average visibility. So it's never been more important to be on top of your digital PR, but it is something that many of us have let slide, right? We don't focus on as much, or we just do standard PR, which is fantastic and very important, but we don't think about the more technical aspect of digital PR. So, boring, find broken links. Okay, it's amazing how we let links languish over time. We do a re-platform, and if we get old sites that are probably coming from really good sources. Now, your SEOs might be all over this, but you might be going, come on, it's old news. Sort that out, all right? It's basic, but it's amazing how often we see people who haven't sorted that out. Revisit past successes. What worked before, but maybe you didn't quite push it out enough. Maybe there's angles that you explored. It was a good idea, but maybe you didn't get the push it needed at the time. Maybe you wrote the content and you did a bit of a field of dreams thing. Thinking if you wrote a brilliant piece of content, people would just find it, but it never got the play. Make sure that you could revisit those and go, you know what, that was good. Let's push that in. And tied to that, create evergreen pieces. What stuff is uniquely yours that people come back to again and again and again. And I could give you multiple case studies, but we don't have a huge amount of time. So there is some changes to how you might approach your digital PR. No follow, right? We've all done it, right? We've said we do a big press release, we do a big campaign, and then we get a load of links, and everyone's kind of going, yeah, but how many of them are follow links? Okay. We all have a follow link. Google, as we say, is still very important, and that's one of the key metrics about what it uses. But actually, being your brand being mentioned out there is as important as ever. So if you do get placements in digital PR and they don't get a link, it's still okay, because these are repeat placements. Any increasing probability of your brand being mentioned alongside your product is critical. On that, maybe a little bit of structuring of how you talk about your company when you put press releases out. It sounds a bit basic, but actually, the engine is trying to put entities and their semantic meaning together, right? So one of our clients, Pure Property Finance, we go Pure Property Finance, bridging finance brokers based in Cardiff, say, and then it's how the machine is putting things together. As Rand Fishkin called it 2 years ago, which I'm sure a lot of very technical people would grit their teeth at. It's spicy autocorrect at its most basic level. Okay, it's looking for the next reasonable word. But of course, in that, seek out editorial guides. A lot of the big, most frequently visible brands on AI are often aligned with big articles that are coming in front of Google. Okay, so, and they are often lists like top 5 mortgages for new homeowners, best credit card for traveling. Because remember, the machine doesn't know what you're actually asking. All right, it's you're asking, what's the best home mortgage for me? And it knows you're a homeowner, and it goes and looks on the web for these sort of things. So, in fact, make sure you've got lots of editorial guides out there. Very quickly, because we don't have a lot of time. We work with the accountancy partnership amongst other brands, and they came to us. They had a very strong SEO grounding already, but what they weren't doing is digital PR. They came to us and we worked with them across a bunch of topics that, like the ones we just talked about, how investors might save more tax legally, crypto peaks, new rules and no selling of vintage. These are all topics that we saw in Natasha's work. These are topics that people are searching on at a huge amount about tax and investments. We got vast amounts of digital PR coverage, and we got lots of links, and that's all great. Digital PR tick, got what we were paid for. But very interestingly, whilst we obviously had an eye on this, but we've got to focus on the big traffic tickets. We very quickly, I mean, within days, we're seeing the brand on getting traffic from ChatGPT, from this one, I think was Claude. And only yesterday, I just went on, just typed in a couple of tax questions and saw the brand again coming up top, both in the AI overviews and the links on the side, the rich links on the side. So this stuff really worked. The digital PR is sort of your big accelerator. So as we get to the end here, just a quick summary, and I'll fly through these. Don't panic, okay? It doesn't sell many courses or whatever, or new AI software, by saying that you can just take a breather and plan out rather than taking advantage of this FOMO. Ignore the noise. There's a lot of stuff that's out there as tactics that are immediately debunked about a week later. So be careful of your sources. You still have plenty of time to adapt, but things are moving fast, but just don't jump to tricks. Search is changing, as we can see, all right? And eventually the way that we search for AIs will overtake traditional search. But that's more to do with human nature and how we like to search, and understanding humans is a critical part of that. Get used to limited data. It's not going to be as simple as it was before, although there's arguments that maybe we had a bit of an artificial view anyway. Get used to assessing things in a different way. But also understand the AI algorithms behave differently. As we saw, they provide different results. We haven't even mentioned social media today, which is a big part of it, as we saw towards the end of Natasha's bit. We just didn't have the time, but we will do this in the future. But social, Reddit, these are huge, huge factors in visibility. Make great content, easy to say, right? But don't bow to the pressure of using AI to generate your stuff. Absolutely use it for editing or whatever, maybe a bit of research. But please, use writers, write for humans and write well, and if you can't, use someone who can. As we've seen, investment in digital PR just pays dividends. It's a no-brainer these days. But also tailor your PR activity, go for your coverage as well as just trying to get links. It's about that brand being out there. But of course, there are quick wins. You don't have to wait over a long time to do these things. We do some stuff, revisited old content, refreshed it, pushed it out there, and we get links on ChatGPT tomorrow or within a week or so. So let's not think that everything's going to take a long time here. Okay, and that is it, I believe. Do we have any questions in the chat? We've got Q&A. Hold on. Nathan, is there any insight? Thank you, Nathan. Is there any insight analysis that shows whether different LMs are used for different needs and uses? That's a really good question. So I can't cite specific research, though I've seen quite a lot on it. I think what you find is people who are in a work context tend to be using things like Copilot a lot, which is sort of linked to a similar way to how ChatGPT works. And so you'll see most people's access, most normal humans' access to AI at the moment is Copilot. So understanding how you appear in Copilot and how Copilot is referencing different things is really, really important and often ignored when we all sit in our Anthropic bubble and we're talking about the fancy things. So that's one bit of advice I'd give there. There is quite a lot out there about which tools are better for different services, but I don't think the general public are familiar with that yet. We are all sat at the cutting edge here. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Natasha?
No, exactly. And I think probably it's ChatGPT because it's still the one that's leading in terms of adoption, that's got the most amount of penetration in the market and most amount of consumer usage as well. But I think it's maybe a little bit less about kind of the specific purposes that they're using for. And I think what's starting to emerge now is how are those algorithms favoring brands differently, kind of akin to what I had mentioned on that last slide of mine. So thinking about, keeping abreast of how those algorithms are changing and what that means for your content, I think just that's a good thing to keep a finger on the pulse.
Jane asks, and this is a really, really key question. I've asked myself this, right? If I structure my content well, and I give the content an author artificially, I assume, well, it must be, can I still use AI to write the content? I think that's a really interesting question. I don't think there's enough data on this yet. So it's got to be what you feel comfortable sitting with. It's going to know, a machine will know that the AI has generated the content, right? So just sticking an author on it doesn't make the machine go, oh, it's an author on it. That's definitely a human that wrote that. It's not stupid. So then you've got to think, well, hold on, am I comfortable with that? So I've used a machine to generate this. There wasn't a real author. So personally, I think it's risky. You're building castles on sand. There may be a midpoint where you interview the expert, the author that has this sort of credibility in the market, and then you structure that interview using AI because at least it's general content. But the jury's out. Personally, I think when you can just use a writer to do all of that for you, I don't know why you'd risk it really. But it's for me to say absolutely don't do that would be false. I can't guarantee it. But I know if you use fully generated content, no matter if you stick an author on it or not, the machine's going to know. Any more questions in chat or Q&A? I know we've got to the end of our time limit. If you do have any questions, please, I can see we've still got about 40 of you still on the call. If you do have any questions, you want to email us afterwards, drop us a message, please let this sit with you. We'll share the content as well, and we'll share a link to the recording as well. So by all means, reach out to us and we can share this with you. Natasha, anything more from yourself?
Nope, that's all. Thank you everyone for joining.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.